off jam session on his famous theme number, Flying Home.
The Sandman, one of the oldest and most unique melees in the entire game, taking the close quarter combat of most melee weapons and giving it a long range alternative to slow down any player from any range. Sounds great, right? Well, it has seen better days. Ever since the Jungle Inferno update, this weapon has been, in my honest opinion, one of Scout's worst weapons ever. Surpassing even the Sun on a Stick in my opinion. Yes, I actually consider the Sun on a Stick to be better than the Sandman, because at least the Sun on a Stick does something. But they end up reworking the stun mechanic to the point of uselessness. There is no reason to be using this weapon outside of goofing around. Yes, it's that bad. But first, let's go at the beginning. The very beginning. 2009's Scout Update that released the Force of Nature, Bulk Atomic Punch, and of course, the Sandman. Back then, it did a complete stun on ball hits, as in, the player that you hit would be completely immobilized and disarmed. So it was pretty much an easy kill, and needless to say, it was pretty unfun to fight against. And at the cost of the inability to double jump, comes to show how terrible Valve was at balancing back then. And it was not only the most overpowered weapon at that time, but also, in my honest opinion, one of the most overpowered versions of any weapon in TF2 history. Not to mention it could also stun Uber-charged players. Yeah, Ubers actually had a counter back in the day. Well, they still do if you use the Holiday Punch and or the Air Blast, but still. There was pretty much no stopping this thing. Yeah. So then Valve decided to say, hey, we understand you don't like the stun mechanic. I know you guys get a little miffed when you get completely immobilized and completely disarmed for a free kill by the Sandman, or pretty much any other class. So, we'll rework it so you can still run around in the fleeing animation. You know, every time you lose a round, you run into fleeing animation? Yeah, that was next. But even then, people considered it too overpowered to completely disarm people and made it unfun to fight against because they couldn't fight back. And it stayed this way for a pretty long time. Until 2017's Jungle Inferno update that finally put an end to the Sandman and put it into a completely crappy state. Now players that are hit by the ball can still fight back. But they still slow them down, right? Well, Valve was like, hey, we know you still hate the Sandman stun mechanic, so how about we slow them down so little there'll be hardly any notice? So now, not only is the ball completely useless, but you also lose 15 health on wearer. Not while active, on wearer. So you'll pretty much be one shot by every rocket launcher in the game at that point. I think you now understand why I feel like the Sandman's a completely pointless weapon.
Oh, but Sammy, I don't think minus 15 health is that big of a deal. You'll just die to rockets. I mean, everybody dies to rockets pretty easily.
Well, I actually find this minus 15 health huge. It can really, really cripple you, and it's hard to believe it, but yes, it's a pretty severe cripple. Scout already has pretty fragile health at 125, but taking it down to 110 is very bad. Now, it wasn't really that big of a deal back in the day, back before the Sandman got nerfed again. But now we need to put in the factor that the Sandman's ball stun mechanic, whatever you want to call it, is now practically useless. This might as well be the Scout variant of the Warrior Spirit. An awful downside for an upside that's not even worth using. And I'm not even going to talk about the other elephant in the room. The Flying Guillotine, which was pretty much the Sandman's girlfriend, was also nerfed in Jungle Inferno to the point it's not even worth using anymore. Yes, the bleed is still good, but let's not forget the Boston Basher does the same thing. And you can take that multiple times in a row. And it still gives you a secondary weapon. And its downside can help you build Uber faster. Yeah, long story short, the Guillotine's also dead. And back before its nerf, this weapon was powerful with the Sandman, having the capability to deal over 150 damage from across the map. That was pretty nuts. And to be honest, it wasn't that overpowered. Number one, you had to hit the exact same target twice with 2 projectiles, which is easier said than done. let's not forget the minus 15 health. And 2, both these weapons have cooldowns, so you can't do it all the time, and plus the Sandman has a pretty long recharge rate. The Guillotine not as much, but still. It was still a pretty long wait, so you had to rely on your scattergun pretty much 90% of the time. But of course, just like the Ambassador nerf, when Valve proposed to change to both these weapons, everyone's like, oh yeah, those weapons are overpowered, yeah, let's nerf them into the ground, when in actuality, it wasn't really overpowered. And while the Sandman did need to change due to how unfun it was to fight against, the Guillotine didn't really deserve any changes at all. It should have just stayed where it was. But, needless to say, Valve went way too far with the Sandman nerf. To the point where, like I've said before, it's not even worth using in most situations. I mean, there's a whole lot of other weapons that probably do the job better. Like I said, Boston Basher, Atomizer, Fan of War, Candy Cane, even sometimes the Holy Mackerel in some situations. But now the Sandman might as well be a stock bat with a pathetic excuse for a stun mechanic at the cost of being severely crippled. Yes, 15 health can make all the difference in the world. I know what you're probably not thinking. How would I fix this weapon? Simple. First of all, remove the health penalty. It was a pretty good idea for bouncing back in the day, but now it's pretty much useless. And then maybe add on a probably 10% damage vulnerability while the weapon is active, so you still have a little bit more punishment when you have the weapon out, but you're not a cripple 100% of the time. And then also add a 20% damage penalty, since this weapon's mostly designed for long range attacks and not sort of hitting people at close range. And then as for the stun mechanic, first of all, slow down the players even more. It should be a little bit more of a debuff, because the stun mechanic at this point is such a pathetic excuse for a stun mechanic. So yeah, make them slow them down a little bit more, so it'll be a little bit better. And also, why stop there? Why don't we add a little bit another downside if you're under the Sandman's ball effect, and have it so that your accuracy decreases depending on how far the ball away was when it hit you. So if you got hit from mid-range, you'd be about 20% less accurate. But if you get hit at long range, it'd be about 50% less accurate. The duration of the debuff will still depend on how far away you are, so sort of like increase depending on the range. But I kind of feel like this might actually be a decent change to the Sandman. It'll now be a weapon that will sort of hinder their accuracy and movement speed, similar to like the concussion grenade in TF Classic. But I don't know, I haven't really played that game before, but still. I think this might actually be a decent debuff for the Sandman in the future, and its downsides will make it more of punishing you if you have it out a lot, sort of like the escape plan, and then rewarding you if you manage to hit the ball properly. But for now, the Sandman is in a pretty unfortunate state. This weapon deserved a change, but not so drastic. But there's still light at the end of the tunnel. I still feel like the new dev team at Valve will take a more deeper look into this weapon and balance it in a nice, amazing way that'll still show some of its former glory back in the day. My name is Dolphin the Dolphin Savage, and thank you for watching The Sad State of the Sandman.